The first 3 multifamily properties I owned were over 100 years old, and I quickly realized the costs associated with maintaining older properties. Not that they were bad investments, but my thinking and underwriting had to change regarding what I took for granted with newer built properties. Welcome to Strategy Saturday. I'm Charles Carillo, and today we're breaking down why property expenses increase as properties get older and what every investor needs to know before buying an older property. So let's get started. When reviewing comparable properties, whether to figure out sale or rent comps, the vintage of the subject in comparable properties is extremely important. So many investors will simply look for properties and units with similar square footage and the same number of bedrooms and bathrooms, while overlooking the age of the property, making that metric less important. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. So there are several reasons why the age of a property matters, especially with rental properties. Number one is older properties rent for less than newer properties. And this is true for both small properties with 5 to 49 units and large properties with 50 plus units in US multifamily markets. Number two, broadly speaking, rent collection decreases as properties age. If you've ever wondered why large private equity firms prefer newer properties, this is a significant contributing factor. Number three is as properties age, their expenses increase, which is why what we will be discussing today. But before we get started, my goal is really not to dissuade investors from buying older properties, but rather to ensure they are aware of the differences in expenses compared to newer built properties. And this doesn't have to mean that they're 100 years old, like in my example of the first properties I purchased. But the thing is that you want to make sure that these properties that you're looking at, you're not comparing a property that was built in 1998 with something that was built in 1978 or 1968, and thinking that the maintenance, the repairs and maintenance is going to be very similar between those two properties. Now, the main reason that properties experience an increase in property expenses as they get older mainly revolves around the natural wear and tear on the building, the systems, and the materials used. So let's break down why this happens and what expenses an investor can expect to increase. So number one is maintenance and repairs. Older systems, including HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and roofing, will require more frequent repairs. Deferred maintenance is very common in older properties, where the owners often patch up repairs instead of addressing the underlying issues. It is common for older materials to be of lower quality or to have additional issues such as like environmental concerns that are often not realized for decades after installation. There's tons of different examples of this, but like it could be galvanized water pipes, polybutylene pipes, it could be aluminum wiring, stab electricals that they used a lot back in I think the 70s. That was a big thing too. Panels, all these different things we found out years later that they just weren't that good and that there was issues with them. And that becomes, once you have an issue, once there's materials that are out there that becomes issues or they find out later, you have to now, you might risk not having insurance on the property, paying a lot for insurance, but either way, you're going to have to pay to have that changed, right? Which is going to cost a lot of money. Number two is capital expenditures, CapEx. So building on the last point of maintenance and repairs and deferred maintenance, CapEx investment is typically required to correctly address issues that have been continually patched over the years, which is capital intensive. So a roof with leaks that requires a roofer or handyman to patch it every 2 months might cost an owner $20,000 to replace it correctly. Boilers that repeatedly experience issues throughout the winter, especially if they're 10 years old or older, most likely require full replacement. And some of these capital expenditures items, they may not be immediately apparent either. In an older property I owned, my property manager once called me and told me that the gas company was requiring me to repipe the natural gas lines in the basement before they turned the natural gas back on. So I had a property with several units and the natural gas was turned off to all of them. Luckily, it was during the summer, so it wasn't during the winter. But the thing though is that that's not something you can just wait around and get repaired. That's something that you need to get repaired immediately. So, and it wasn't even something that I've ever heard of, but it makes sense after paying for it. It made sense because that gas piping is probably 70 years old, right? Sitting down there in a damp basement, it's going to be something that's going to need repair. And during your initial due diligence on the property, not one of the things I was really checking. Number three is your regulatory compliance. So this is something that's not as clear cut as seeing one boiler or a furnace is going to break down. But it's when you're dealing with government, these regulatory issues can be challenging to determine if you're not well versed in a city's codes or have a property manager who is. Okay, so this is one of those things when you're buying a new property, if you're starting in a new area, you have a property manager. This is why we always suggest, like, bring that property manager into the deal, pay them for assisting you with the deal, looking at deals. It's a great way because they might look at it and be like, these are the things you need to look at. Even if you don't utilize or need that information for that property that you're looking at, you can use it now for other properties in the area. So they might say, does this property have a fire alarm system? Okay. Yes, it does. Now I know, even if I don't buy that property or no, it doesn't, I know for future properties, this is something I really have to look at, this fire alarm system. And I know that it's going to cost $10,000, let's just say, for this size property. If I speak to him and I see what he says, and I know now I have this and I can put this into my underwriting, knowing that this is going to be one big CapEx item that I might need 1 month after buying the property, or might need, 10 years down the road, depending on when the fire marshal comes around and does their checks and my property is the next one on the list. Now, one of the common issues we encountered with older properties was the city's new codes regarding apartment buildings and installation, like I said, of the fire alarm systems was one thing for us, and fire extinguishers. So if you purchase a property and then find out months later that you need to invest that $5,000, $10,000 into that new fire compliance standards, there really is no way of knowing 100% of this when these new codes will be required, and you definitely don't know when the city's going to ask you to do it. I had my properties so close to each other in the city, and they hit one property, a couple of years after this started, and then one property like a few years later. They're working this weird way through the city, and I don't know what their planning is, but there's no way you would know. You don't know if they're going to go to this street over here, they're going to go this direction. One of the properties never needed one, right? But the other ones did. So it was one of those things like you had that put aside, because it's not just something you can say, you don't want to get into the bad side of the fire marshal or anything like this, or any government officials, and you want to make sure that your properties are all habitable, they're compliant, all this kind of stuff. But these are one of the things that you don't know what you don't know, and having someone that knows the area, especially if that's in your corner, like a property manager, is especially important when you're buying properties. Number 4 is insurance cost. So insurance companies view older properties as having a higher chance of claims: fire, water, structural, and liability. Older properties are typically not 100% code compliant with new codes and standards, and they're often grandfathered in. Deferred maintenance is prevalent in these properties, and typically as properties age, their premiums also increase. And this can happen at all different parts of the property. I've had it before where you don't have, 2 forms of ingress and egress. You have stairs that go up that go up too many stairs without having like a turn. I mean, there's so many different things that can happen. Fire escapes, not having like actual stairs coming down from this unit. And these are like grandfathered in things that would never fly in the future. And the thing though is that there's not like when you buy a property like this that has something grandfathered in, you're not going to get some kind of sign thing from the city that says everything here is fine or this is done. And the other thing too is you maybe don't want to go and talk to the fire marshal if you're buying this property and go, hey, is this fire escape fine? You don't want to bring attention to your property. So you're really just kind of waiting there and seeing what happens as you try to, renovate this property and get it going, in a better direction and value add it. But it's something where you just have to have money in reserve. That's the only way that fixes this, is knowing about it up front that could be an issue and having money in reserve so that you can really, address it immediately. I remember with one of my properties I had years back, the fire marshal came through and my property manager was walking with them, and they gave like a laundry list of stuff, right? My property manager, he would have been in the city for 25, 30 years, something like this. He knew this guy, and that was he kind of knew him, but he knew his boss, the fire marshal, the chief or whatever. And he was like, okay, you're not going to require all this, after we reviewed it with him. And he goes, this is just what I see, blah, blah, blah. And I got a call from my property manager, and he was like, this is what they are. I told him, hey, you can't expect us to do all of this. We can do some of this. What can we do? And he was telling me, he goes, if he doesn't work with us, I can always call the chief, which is something I couldn't do. I didn't have that type of pull in that area. Had been around that many decades. I didn't know any of this. So that property manager saved me thousands of dollars because they were able to say, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to change all of this. How about if we do this? These, like the reflective tape on these stairs, we add in an additional handrail over here. We put a fire alarm system in. We add a few different fire extinguishers from the laundry room up the back stair, whatever it might be. And that was fine. So, but it's one of those things where if you don't know, if I was a new investor there, I'm going to pay, contractors to work through this list, and this thing would have cost me thousands of dollars more. And this is something, again, you probably don't know when you're walking through a property. One thing you're not looking at is probably how many railings are up. You're probably not looking at any of these different things that's coming through the lens of someone from the fire department. So it's very important. And once they look through it, it's also through the insurance company as well. And so as these properties get older with these issues, these properties are typically going to be, you're going to have premiums that increase, and the requirements, not just from like fire marshals and government associations, but you're also going to have it from insurance companies. Okay. I've had before where they'd say there's something wrong with his back stairs, like the outside stairs. They probably didn't, I don't think my insurance company went into the properties really that much. Maybe they take a picture of the electrical panels, but they would see it's upgraded from the outside. So usually that wasn't much of an issue, but that would be a thing. If you had electrical that hadn't been updated, that's a big thing. They usually have to get a picture of those and make sure that everything's compliant. The other thing was like sidewalk issues because of tripping, because of someone falling, whatever it might be. Stairs, huge thing that they're going to check, especially outdoors. They're going to check the driveway. Had them, make me do a number of different things with driveways as well. So these are things that probably, if you've had a driveway that was done in the last 30 years, it's probably not an issue. But when you had driveways that were done 60 years ago, especially up north where you're having freezing, water getting in, water expanding, water coming out, all these different things that goes on every year with these properties, that's going to really put a dent in the life of these properties. And it's going to require you to do a lot of maintenance on the properties to get them up to that insurance, that new level of what the insurance company wants to see. That's also something that you might not know initially. You might know because you can put the property out the bid and get kind of an idea, an estimate on what insurance is. However, you're not going to know exactly what it is until you buy the property, and maybe until the first renewal, or if you have, hopefully you don't, but until you maybe have a claim, and then they come out and they go, what's going on in this property? And they're going to check all these things, or they maybe not renew you at all. So these are things that you have to be aware of when you're looking at properties and what could be hazardous beforehand. Number 5 is utility inefficiency. So this usually affects tenants more than it does property owners, but our goal as multifamily investors is to minimize turnover. Okay, so if a unit has dramatically higher utility costs, it may convince a tenant to move rather than renew their lease. And you want to make sure your rental units are as efficient as reasonably possible. So electric heat is expensive, and during a renovation, an investor may opt to install kind of like a real HVAC system instead of keeping electric baseboard heating, which is less expensive to install, less expensive for maintenance, but adding insulation, replacing the windows, it helps decrease the inefficiencies your tenants will experience in your properties. It can be a little expensive, but the thing though is that if someone's getting high bills, that they're probably going to leave if it's really stretching their budget during those winter months or during those summer months, if they're not insulated for the AC, stuff like this. But mainly it's usually during the winter when properties that aren't well insulated, it's really going to show, or they're using expensive heating methods. That's something that you kind of want to avoid. And that's why a lot of tenants, I remember when I would rent apartments myself, it was something that they'd always want to know if utilities were included, right? Because they didn't want this, they want to have some kind of control over their budget, which I don't blame them, but the best thing that we can do is provide them with as much efficiency as possible on those units. And this can be something, obviously, we're going into a property, there's going to be a lot of things that you want to fix right away. You're probably not going to fix stuff that's already working, like those electric baseboards, especially if they're on second and third floors where you have the heat that goes up. Your first floors, that's where you're going to be spending your time, or larger units. That's where you're going to be spending your time fixing first, and stuff that's already broken, right? But these are things you have to keep in mind when you're leasing properties and when you want people, because if you're giving them a rent increase, but they're like, well, during the winter, my electrical goes up 2, 3x, I mean, that's going to be a tough sell because you're going to have that with every tenant coming through. So it's something that you need to do if you want to keep tenants and not have all that turnover. Number 6 is renovations and upgrades. So with aging properties, renovations and upgrades will be required in order to capture higher rents and maximize the NOI, the net operating income of your property. And this requires a capital outlay, which might be prohibitive for many owners. And for investors looking to purchase older properties, they should budget for higher repairs and maintenance and higher reserves to plan for future capital expenditures and renovations. And as an investor in older properties, I would ensure that any property manager I hire has experience in managing properties of a similar age and engage them prior to purchasing the property so I can run the due diligence and inspection report past them before making a decision. Now, if you want to learn more about buying older properties and newer properties, you can check out episode SS220, that's SS220, and I hope you enjoyed. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe, submit comments and potential show topics at globalinvestorspodcast.com. If you're interested in actively investing in real estate, please check out our courses and mentoring programs at syndicationsuperstars.com. That is syndicationsuperstars.com. Look forward to 2 more episodes next week. See you then. Have you always wanted to invest in real estate but didn't have the time, didn't know where to find the deals, couldn't get the funding, and didn't want tenants calling you? Since 2006, I've been buying income-producing properties in great locations that provide us with consistent passive income while we wait for appreciation in the future and take advantage of tax laws while we're waiting. And unlike your financial advisor, we invest alongside our investors in every property we purchase. Check out investwithharborside.com. If you like the idea of investing in real estate, if you like the idea of passive income, partner with us at investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com.
This episode should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Any investment opportunities mentioned on this podcast are limited to accredited investors. Any investments will only be made with proper disclosure, subscription documentation, and are subject to all applicable laws. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Syndication Superstars, LLC exclusively.